a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
In the 1950s and 60s, economic injustice, racial inequality, and job discrimination was one of the biggest barriers for Black people in America. They worked jobs that required no skill and little to nothing pay. During the Civil Rights Movement, they often worked in farms and fields as a way to retain land and get a bigger opportunity. In December 1955, Rosa Parks, a Black woman, had been arrested for violating a segregation ordinance on a public bus in Montgomery. Black citizens were furious. King, Ralph Abernathy, and Alabama State Chairman NAACP called a public meeting. They urged to boycott the segregated city buses, and the MIA was formed, also known as the Montgomery Improvement Association. The boycott lasted over a year until the bus company finally capitulated. Overnight, King had become a national hero and an acknowledged leader in the civil rights struggle. He had been elected president of the MIA, but was often threatened and was in constant danger. In 1957, 60 Black ministers assembled in Atlanta to form the SCLC, also known as the Southern Leadership Conference, to continue the fight for civil rights. In 1958, the SCLC sponsored 21 Black mass meetings in an attempt to double the number of Black voters. Shortly after, King visited Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru due to his interest in Mahatma Gandhi's practice of nonviolence. But when King returned to America, the civil rights struggle had drastically gotten worse. In December 1961, King and the SCLC were invited by Black leaders in Albany, Georgia, to lead their civil rights struggle. After 2,000 frustrated African Americans clashed with police, King called for a day of penitence and was jailed himself. He was tried and given a suspended sentence. Later, the SNCC and the SCLC members were harassed by whites. Churches were bombed and local citizens were threatened. It wasn't until 1964, the Federal Civil Rights Act was passed, that public facilities in Albany were desecrated. On June 1963, King and 125,000 people marched in the Freedom Walk in Detroit. And in March, over 275,000 people assembled in Washington. They eventually moved to St. Augustine, and a week later, the 1964 Civil Rights Bill was passed. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most influential persons in American history, and he gave African American civil rights through diplomacy.